Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to our May edition of Technicolor. My name's Peter, and I'm the Prevention and Testing Team Manager at Positive East, and I'll be hosting this month's edition of Technicolor. For those of you who don't know, Technicolor is Positive East's monthly LGBT film night that started in Redbridge Central Library in 2019 to provide the LGBT community in Redbridge a much needed safe space to get together and be ourselves. Since COVID struck, though, we have moved Technicolor online, and hopefully you've had a chance to watch back some of our monthly musings. Just as a quick intro to Positive East, we're London's largest community-based HIV charity. We provide HIV prevention and support services to people living with HIV who either live in or access HIV care in East London. As I mentioned, I manage the prevention and testing services at Positive East, and we're really excited to be resuming our face-to-face testing service from next Monday, so Monday the 17th, just in case you're watching back. And we've launched an appointment booking service for the HIV testing service. So if you visit our website, positiveeast.org.uk/HIV-testing, on there you'll see when and where you can test with us next. And over the coming weeks and months, we'll also be announcing new sites and spaces that we'll be testing from, so you can make HIV testing and as easy and convenient for you as possible. Also, if there's anything that comes up from tonight's discussion, or you just want to have a general chat about your sexual health and well-being, you can always log onto our website and click the live chat button, or speak to Pat, our sexual health bot. You can also email us at prevention@positiveeast.org.uk, or call us on 020 77 91 2855. As with most charities, Positive East has had to cancel a lot of our regular fundraising events, such as the Red Run, due to the pandemic, which means that we need your support more than ever. If you would like to make a donation or fundraise for us, please go on to our website and have a look at the different ways that you can help support our work. We also want to keep our services as free and accessible as possible. So the lovely Alex will be popping a link to a feedback form in the comments section, so we can get your feedback and obviously adapt and change the different ways that we reach members of the community. So on to the main event. Tonight I'm joined by Jamie Jaxon, known to many by his Twitter handle Transman on Prep, does what it says on the tin, and he's also loved by many others in the community for his community activism. He's been part of a variety of campaigns for organisations such as Prepster and Sophia Forum, and is a real asset to the community and sexual health sector. I've had the pleasure of meeting Jamie in person in the past, and you get to meet him virtually this evening. If you'd like to ask either of us any questions, or you'd like to comment on this evening's film Brace, please again comment in the comments section on Facebook. So without further ado, shall we kick off with a quick discussion on Technicolor pick Brace. So Brace is a film that's directed by trans director and actor Jake Graf. So Jamie, what were your initial takeaways from the short film?
Hi everybody. It raised quite a few points, but two big ones for me. Right at the very beginning, it was somebody who was trans, and it also sort of brought into question whether their sexuality and potentially a period of experimentation, and trying to figure out. I mean, for me personally, once I went down the trans route, realized I was trans, then it opened up a lot of doors, because I was thinking, well, why am I so fixated on my sexuality, and is there other options, and it just gives you a whole chance to reassess yourself and reflect and think about things differently. Now, it may never change, but it does give you the opportunity to go back down that route and to redefine who you are in some ways. The other really big one was the disclosure sort of side of it, whereas one party, Rocky, wanted to sort of like get it out in the open right at the very beginning before you invest in a relationship, whereas the other one, Adam, was sort of, I want you to get to know me first before I sort of say this, because it might not change anything. Whereas if I say at the beginning, you might then discount me before we even have the chance to find out whether we are compatible and whether we can have a relationship. So those were a couple of really big things. There were lots of other bits in there as well. The attitude from the nursing staff, and that kind of stuff was all very, very real as well. Those attitudes do exist. Thankfully, in my experience, not as much as they used to, but they're still there. They're maybe not quite so blatant as the film sort of showed it, but it might be lots of little things that happen. So it's still there. There is still a lot of attitudes that need changing, because their experiences come from what they've read, and rather than from actually meeting people. So yeah, so there's a few things there really. There's a whole lot in that really short film that that's real, that people experience.
Yeah, I think your point about talking to someone about your gender and your sexuality is different for everyone, and I think it's really hard because you can have like a really strong support network, you can have like a real affinity with someone, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you feel sort of that trust and that safety to always disclose with those people.
Yeah.
I think what I did really like sort of about the film is it, and I'm sure for many people kind of watching it, seeing some of those club nights and stuff, and that sense of community that hasn't gone away for a lot of people, that there is space to explore sexuality. And I think there's also something about validation, feeling desired and wanted, feeling safe, and just being able to kind of let loose a little bit and feel like yourself. And I think within the film, seeing that stark contrast between them when they went to, I think it was a chicken shop or a takeaway, which then ended up resulting in the hate crime. There's that you can feel safe at one moment in time, but as soon as you sort of move between spaces, that safety and those boundaries and those barriers have to go up. I think one of the things that we were speaking about was around maybe having to suppress your expression and stuff when you navigate some spaces. So for example, when Adam went to the hospital to go and see Rocky, and was telling the nurse that she was misgendering Rocky, and that Rocky was on the wrong ward, that he was correctly gendered, and whether that's something around passing. And yeah, basically that people shouldn't have to go through that process to have a different experience, to have to sort of adapt to different spaces. Yeah, I don't know what your thoughts were on that.
I mean, I get the bit about the validation. I mean, that's one of the things that happened to me. One of the things that I do is I went to certain spaces to see, can I go in those spaces? Am I accepted in those spaces? And that validation, yes, I definitely sort of understand that part of it. And I needed it. But that's me personally. I needed that. You said something else then, and I can't remember what it was, because I was like, oh yeah, definitely. Oh, the LGBT. No, it was about safe spaces. LGBTQ plus spaces aren't necessarily always a safe space either. And we know that from, there's a particular group out there at the moment that definitely doesn't want the T to be part of it. So there is an element of that as well. So it isn't even, isn't even just in what should be a safe space. It isn't always a safe space either. You just have to sort of play it a little bit by ear, and in what you say, who you say it to. Yeah, there's no way around that. Some spaces you would definitely go in and you would sort of think, I will be a lot more careful when I go into those spaces. And other spaces where you think is going to be okay may not be.
I think I guess there's maybe going back to those sort of fundamental safety tips that when you are trying out new spaces, if you're on hookup apps and stuff, is just remembering to let people know what your plans are. So there's someone that can kind of check in with you and make sure that you're right. Because I can imagine it can be quite a burden when you're trying something for the first time and feeling that pressure. And if there's any sense of sort of shame or a negative experience, that I would hate for someone to have to go through that process themselves and not have a support network to say, actually, this is what went down. I wasn't comfortable with it.
Yeah, I mean, when I went to the spaces, the clubs, I don't drink very much when I go to them anyway, but I made sure that I was very much sober when I went there. Yeah, it didn't stop me from having a drink, but I was very much aware of my surroundings and what was happening. And I took it very easy when I went there, observe rather than interact, and just gradually sort of build up the confidence and that. But that was one of the things that I did. I made sure that I was very much aware of what was happening around me, because I didn't know how safe I was going to be in those environments. So that would be one of the things that I would say. And the hookup thing. I mean, I have done that. I have messaged my friends, sort of said like, hey, I'm going here. If anything happens, or take a screenshot of something, written a note of if I've somebody's house at the address and I've left that note by my bed, so if anything ever happened, that's visible. Nobody else will see it unless anything happened to me. But do you know what I mean? It's just something a little bit like that, just to make sure somebody was aware that I could check in.
Yeah, and I think like particularly when so I'm thinking that a lot of people might be feeling pressure to get back out there. I think particularly with that final lifting of the lockdown on the 21st of June, if all goes to plan, and kind of we're seeing those things trickling in about hugging and I guess intimacy that we take from that as well, is just to say to people to kind of take your time with that. Don't
bit out of practice. So
I think a lot of people can feel like an element of performance pressure. Oh, everyone's going to be like out every single night. I think like what you were saying in terms of like alcohol and substances, that it's about pacing yourself and not feeling that you necessarily need like a stimulant in order to have that good time. That if you enjoy your alcohol, that's one thing, but for you to not necessarily have the dependency on substances in order for you to have a good time when you're navigating those spaces. And again, kind of, I guess, navigating sex and stuff that, like you said, a lot of people might feel out of practice and might feel an element of performance pressure, feeling that everyone else is doing it, and just take your time.
It's just getting used to being around other people again, because a lot of people have been very, very isolated. So all of a sudden it's quite overwhelming. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've been to a bar, sat outside, and all of a sudden, I mean, it was just the noise of everybody laughing and chatter. No, I've been working through it, but I still hadn't experienced that kind of feeling. And it was very refreshing. It was great to hear, but it also reminded me that actually there's a lot of things that I'm probably sort of less aware of now than I would have been. And, and when we do go back out and to some of the clubs and things like that, then just to sort of like ease myself in a little bit, I'm not saying I'm not going to have a drink or anything like that, but it's just sort of, just enjoy it for a bit.
I think that's a really good point about like that stark difference and kind of like a bit of a sensory overload. And again, to kind of do things, everyone to do things at their own pace.
Yeah.
You might have like loads of friends that are kind of like really keen to get back out there. They feel comfortable, they feel safe. And for other people, that can feel like quite a stark contrast to how you might have been feeling over the last 9 months or so. I do wonder whether this is giving us a time to kind of reflect on our mental health and well-being, and kind of like what we appreciate being around us. Some people are kind of naturally extroverted people that really recharge with loads of people around them, and other people are kind of like a stark contrast to that and really recharge at home. And I wonder whether more people have kind of been in tune with that during this period.
I mean, I'm definitely the introvert. I need the space away, and if I'm in a very big group, it's not so much I switch off, it's just that I can't keep track of everything, and I can't hear that well when there's lots of other things going on, and so I find it a little bit isolating even when I'm in a big group sometimes. So maybe that's why when I went out, it was sort of quite, I wasn't saying it was intimidating, because it was quite refreshing to hear it all, but I was also very aware of it. Whereas other people, it'd be just like, just soak it in, and it'd just be like, yay, and that'd be it. There
were some people, it's like a recharge, like it's
yeah
back again, and for other people it's kind of like, what is going on? But I even think like when I've gone to the office a couple of times, like you can walk through some spaces, it's like a ghost town, and then you'll see photos of kind of like Soho with like everyone bustling out on the streets, and even kind of like when you turn around the corner, you kind of like, oh my god, like what's happening? I kind of wanted to go a little bit back and take you on a little tour, for you to take us on a bit of a tour. How did you first become involved with sort of Prepster and community activism? Where did that come from?
Right, that was all just because I like to do research type stuff. So what happened was I came out, started my transition sort of like August 2013. And I'd been on Twitter, had an anonymous account, and HIV sort of cropped up on that. Initially, people like Christian John back then, but then I'd started talking to people like, which they're all out now, and you probably all know the names: Tom Hayes, Alex Sparrowhawk, Stuart Mullen, all these people that I'd been talking to for a long time. And then I kind of found out about HIV, and then I sort of started hearing about PrEP. And then about October 2015, I think it was, Nicholas Fustel had taken his Proud documentary. He was showing it in Birmingham, and Will Nutland was with him. And so they were talking about PrEP and how to get it. And so I'd been sort of thinking about this, but I didn't know whether the generics were genuine, which was the question way back then, because it's quite a long time ago now. We didn't know that these things were genuine, but they've been tested and they were what they said they were, and there was reliable sources. So it was from that meeting I'd gone along to that. I'd spoken to Will. I then got back in touch with Greg, because I'd kind of been on the Twitter, because they'd both I Want PrEP Now and Prepster launched roughly about the same time, a few months before this. And I sort of said, hey, I'll put your cards out in Birmingham and stuff like that, send us stuff and I'll put it out. So my activism, if you like, and my routine was nothing much. I just said, look, hey, I'll talk to people about it. I'll put the cards out in where nearby where I live is Birmingham, so in sort of like her street. I put it in the shops there, down that street, and some of the bars and things like that. And that's how I initially got involved. And then when Nicholas was doing his 17 documentary, and asked for people, and I said, hey, look, this is my story and this is how I got involved, blah, blah, blah. And so I ended up in there, and it kind of So, so the prep side of it's sort of grown from that element of it. The trans side of it has come from, again, right at the very beginning, Clinic Q were doing their trans health conferences, and it happened to be in Birmingham, and I just went along. I did coat check, but that's how I got to know some of the people from there. And so when they wanted people, I said, hey, I can do some stuff for you. And so I don't do anything like massive in terms of, you know, my ideas and my brand or whatever, you know, my projects or something like that. But it's all to do with amplifying other people's voices and just sort of helping them do stuff. Because at the time there was no sort of trans men talking about their sexual health and that kind of thing and about PrEP. So I was kind of like, well, I'll do it. I don't mind talking about it. So that's kind of how I got involved. So it was little things like handing out cards and just then just sort of having little snippets in films or things like this, you know, where you say, come along and talk to us about this, you know. So yeah, that's how I kind of get involved. And unfortunately, there are more people doing it now, but there still isn't a great number of people that are just willing to put their head above the parapet. And I can understand that, because the last couple of years for trans people, there's been such a lot of sort of press coverage at the moment. And I can understand why people want to keep their heads down for it as well. And then obviously the last 18 months, the COVID, so the PrEP side of it hasn't really been such a great thing. And yes, I know people still go out, but then a lot of people have also not been going out and having a break and stuff like that. So, you know, yeah, lot going on, a lot of it to do with just really small stuff, you know, just chipping away and just passing messages on.
I think you're doing yourself a disservice. I think to me, activism has so many different cogs and elements to it, and sometimes it's the things that you might feel is a small thing has a great impact on someone else. It's that visibility that you were saying, that someone may look at you and your visibility and your openness as a trans man navigating sex and sexual health and think, actually, someone feeling so comfortable and confident that they look to you. And I think as well, your point about visibility and safety, there are always going to be activists that are behind the scenes that are kind of like doing the data and the research, and it kind of harking back to the start of the AIDS epidemic. There were in the insight into some of those meetings that you had, kind of like doctors and nurses and lawyers who were behind the scenes that played that role. And again, in It's a Sin, that a lot of Jill's work was done on the telephone and behind the scenes, and every element of contributing to improving people's sexual health is that element of activism. So I just want to say that what you might think is only a small thing for you is having like a really great impact.
One of the things that I believe in, I mean, obviously you need the big grand gestures, you know, you need the organizations that do the big policy type stuff as well. But also it's just, I mean, I'm out at work and stuff like that. I mean, I don't hide it at all. And I think for me, that's kind of my thing really, is individuals and knowing individuals, because they can read what's in the press and think, oh, that's it. But when they actually know somebody, they think, actually, hang on, the person I know and what I'm reading in the newspaper, the two things aren't the same. And I think that's kind of my bit, if you like, the human element, you know, the personal touch kind. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I'm only one little person, so I don't interact with that many people. But if somebody else does the same thing, and then there's somebody else doing the same thing, eventually it all just ripples out, and it'd be like, oh, actually, I know that person. I know somebody. I'm aware of this person. That's, you know, so yeah, you need both things. You need the big grand gestures, you know, the big policy type stuff and the big campaigns, but you also need all the other people and the creative things, you know, like you see people that they make t-shirts or they've got an interesting tattoo or something, you know, and people talk about it and go, oh yeah, that's because. And so even in their own little tiny way, they think is a little tiny way, they are actually doing the same thing. They're just saying, hey, look, we exist, we walk among you, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we don't interrupt your lives.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's about reclaiming that narrative and not letting people tell you who you are. I think we were talking a bit before we went live about there's also a lot to celebrate within the trans community as well. There's so much a wealth of diversity, of skills, of talents, and that's what we should be celebrating. That's like particularly within our own community as well, that we should be there to support and back one another. And I think you're right as well about how do we make more members of the community feel comfortable to be part of some of those campaigns and having their voices heard, whilst also feeling safe and secure with the organisations that are behind those campaigns. I think also as well, just to say for some people that might not be aware of where the trans community and HIV kind of sits, what the data that we know, I think it's only really been collected for the last 2 years or so around trans status monitoring in sexual health clinics. And so there's a rough estimation that about 140 people in the UK are trans and living with HIV. But it's very possible and likely that it's higher than that because people's gender markers haven't been reflective of also having trans status monitoring as well. So actually they're being automatically assumed to be cisgender. And I think there's a really good point about it's important to be counted and also making sure that services meet the needs of the community as well through that process. I think going back to Brace and sort of seeing how Rocky was put on an award that didn't reflect their identity and their experience, it's kind of like reliving that trauma and not having that validity. Yeah,
but that's part of the problem because there's, you know, for various reasons, people don't have legal documentation or other, you know, documentation or whatever, but also it sort of the non-binary community sort of falls into that category as well because, you know, their identity again is different. I mean, some may be trans, some may not be, but their identity again is sort of different, but they have some of the similar sort of things as well because the documentation doesn't match up with how they present themselves or how they feel about themselves or whatever. So, you know, there's so much that's, I guess, I was going to say is new. I think it's new in the fact that people are trying to resolve any of the conflicts and, you know, and about making people feel comfortable and stuff like that. So wherever you are, whether you're trans, non-binary or cis, you know, with how secure you are in those sort of spectrums is where people are, you know, organizations are trying to come to terms with that and trying to make everybody feel welcome. So that's from, you know, going out, that's where you work or where you go to school, or, you know, how you interact with the medical services. And that includes your sexual health services as well, because, you know, you can have bad experiences with those. I did, thankfully. It was a long time ago now, and so I would like to think that doesn't really happen anymore. But you know, these things do happen, and it's about raising that awareness. And it's, I mean, some of it, I mean, you'll know from when you talk about sexual health and people say, do you have protected sex? And it's kind of like, well, what do you mean by that? Do you mean, do I have condom sex? Do you know what I mean? What actually are you talking about? Because I'm on PrEP, or my partner is undetectable, or I've had my Hep A, Hep B jabs, so at what point are you talking about protection? So it's just terms, and that's a term, because for years people have said you have protected sex, and now it's actually, do you have condomless sex? Do you know what I mean? It's just a small change, but it's an incredible amount of difference in what that actually means and what people understand it to mean. And the same thing's happening with, trans community. So when it comes to gender identity and in some ways sexualities as well, these little tiny things now are sort of like creeping in and changing people's perceptions. But also it's sort of focusing a lot of places to try and make sort of more for places to be more inclusive, to take into account that actually what we've been putting out before might not be quite the correct message for a whole load of people, and we're not including those people. We're not drawing those people into to be talked about, and to engage with our services and our wherever, workplace, schools, whatever.
Yeah, I think Michelle Ross from Clinic U is already a good example of nothing for us without us.
Yeah.
And that notion that kind of co-design and co-production of services. And I think also as well, we've got so many organisations and networks that really there isn't an excuse to say, oh, I didn't know how to kind of adapt something. There's a lot of organisations that are out there. And I think also to say that in terms of if someone does have a poor experience with healthcare providers, that there are quite a few organisations that can advocate on your behalf and support you in maybe filing a formal complaint or directly addressing that with service managers as well. So just to look out for those organisations that are in your area, and they tend to be LGBT organisations. I know quite a few of them, like Switchboard and LGBT Foundation and Brighton and Hove Switchboard, that they're part of like a rainbow badge scheme that is particularly looking at how healthcare providers meet the needs of the LGBT community, because a lot of the time they can be unique to us. But I think there's also a lot of lessons that can be learned from minority communities that can have an improved impact on a majority as well. And I think also as well, your point about the language of sex has changed quite quickly. I think going back to you were saying that about your involvement around about 2015, and it's not long since PrEP became available on the NHS, and for some people they might not be aware of that. They might not realise that actually if you contact your local sexual health clinic, you might be able to access PrEP free on the NHS. And also, I guess, to plug that if anyone wants support with that within the London area, please do get in contact with us, because we can support you with a referral into accessing PrEP for free on the NHS.
Actually, I've got a quick point as well, because we talk about PrEP and we talk about you, and the one that gets missed, and for me, I think is slightly more important, is PEP. Because generally, if you're in a situation for that, then maybe other circumstances going on. And so you need to be aware of that before. Obviously, you just need to be aware of it. So if you're not going to go on PrEP, that's fine. I mean, I talk about PrEP, but it's a personal choice. It's whether you want to do it or not. But what I do think that we sometimes miss the PEP, and you could argue that that's actually slightly more important, because that's an in the moment thing. That's a very, you've got very limited time frame to access that if you're in that sort of situation. So yeah, sorry, PEP.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right. People might start to see more organisations use the term the HIV prevention toolkit, and I guess it's this notion about knowing all of your options available, and that some people might dip in and out depending on what's going on for them in that moment in time. So I guess maybe we should quickly whiz through the full toolkit. Do you want to can you give us kind of like a 30-second elevator pitch for PrEP, and then I'll do PEP?
PrEP is what you would take before you come into contact with, or potentially come into contact with HIV. So you take it, there are different ways to take it, but one of the main ways is you take it daily. There's another one where you take it just before and after events. But basically, yeah, it's to stop you getting HIV when you're aware that you may be in a situation or a period of time when that is possible. So you take something to help prevent it.
Okay. Yeah, no, really good, really good. Well done on your elevator pitch. I'm sold. So yeah, it's HIV medication taken by someone who's HIV negative to prevent acquiring HIV. And likewise,
and make sure you have the test beforehand if you're going to take it.
Yes,
that's important.
Which obviously, if you're in,
you need to know you're negative first.
Yeah, if you're in East London, you're going to test with Positive East. Come on, come and get your HIV test with us. So on the flip side, PEP again is HIV medication. However, you would take it after an incident where you think that you might have been exposed to HIV and you didn't have a prevention option, so you weren't using condoms or you weren't taking PrEP. The thing to remember is that you must take it within 72 hours after exposure, ideally within the first 48 hours. If they're open, go to a sexual health clinic and explain the circumstances. But if they're not, you can also access it from A&E as well. And it's a 28-day course of medication, and you'll need to take it every single day. But hopefully by initiating it within the right time, the likelihood of you then going on to be HIV positive is really small. And then we've got some other bits within that toolkit as well. So Jamie mentioned about U equals U. So what that stands for is undetectable equals untransmittable. So again, we're talking about HIV medication, but this time it's the medication that the HIV positive person's taking. And when they have enough of that in their system and they're taking it consistently, it suppresses the copies of HIV in their system. So it means that if they had condomless sex with someone else, that they couldn't pass on HIV to a HIV negative person. So essentially medication has really impacted our toolkit, and sitting alongside condoms, again, quite a lot of innovation within condoms, finding the right fit and feel for you, different textures. We've got internal condoms, dental downs, so different barrier methods. And then the other thing is, like we keep mentioning about knowing your HIV status to then make an informed decision about, are you on medication because you're negative, or are you on HIV medication because you're positive? So we often talk about this term called a window period, which basically means the time between when you last had sex and the time that you would take your test. So with a lot of home tests and community testing, that window period is 3 months. So say, for instance, Jamie hasn't been taking his PrEP, maybe has had like a bout of abstinence and is ready to get back out there and wants to take PrEP. Now would be a great time for him to take that HIV test and then get into that routine of having the full sexual health screening, just to feel in control of your sexual health and know what's happening to your body and what you want to do about that. I think also your point about the different dosing options for PrEP, there's different options depending on the type of sex that people are having. So Jamie mentioned about event-based dosing, which is basically if you know that you're going to hook up with someone at say 10 o'clock, you could take 2 PrEP pills up to 2 hours beforehand if you're having anal sex. However, because vaginal tissue is much stronger, you would need to take PrEP one pill every single day for 7 days before sex and 1 pill every day 7 days after sex. And it just because it takes longer for it to be absorbed in the vaginal tissue. So again, people might kind of flip between what type of sex that they're having depending on how much PrEP they've got in their system. So hopefully that helps people with our toolkit. I kind of wanted to go back to something that you've been a part of recently, which is the Sophia Forum video, where you share very briefly in the clip about your experience of navigating sex on premises venues, like particularly saunas. Could you give us kind of like a bit of an insight, if people haven't maybe been to saunas, what's a sauna like? What's its sort of, what's its function like? How does it work?
Basically, it's sauna. I mean, there are saunas there, depending on where you go. I mean, but basically, you're naked, so you just go there to have sex, basically, or go to watch people having sex. I mean, you don't actually have to participate yourself, but that's essentially what those places are. But they do have saunas or a pool, or things like that as well. So and they have a rest area. That's quite important as well. So because you could be there for a while, and they do have sort of like a sort of chill out type space. Somewhere there's just a TV on or whatever, and you can get a cup of coffee and something to eat or whatever. So. But yeah, you basically, everybody's there for same sort of reason that you're there, and the good things about it, there's kind of a bit of a safety for me. I find it a bit safer because you're in an environment, if anything happened, there's other people around. Whereas if you go to somebody else's house, you are literally, there's just maybe the two of you don't really know who the other people are. So for me, I find it sort of quite reassuring and sort of a safer environment. And I was going to say, there's no messing about. You know why you're there. So there's not like you've got to chat to somebody for hours on end. And do you know what I mean? It's I guess instant gratification, I guess, is probably the best way of putting it. But yeah, I mean, I find them. I enjoy going there, and I found it good for me. I haven't been in relationships since I started my transition, so going to those sort of places, and for me, especially when you've had surgeries, you change. What you want changes, and maybe who you want to be with changes as well. And that's where the prep thing came in for me as well, because it gave me the opportunity to have that period of exploration, where I needed to understand how my body worked, what I wanted, what I enjoyed, especially after if you've had surgery, if your body's changing, or if testosterone is changing things for you, then what you did before doesn't necessarily apply afterwards. So that's where they're good for me. I found them good for that, but I also found them, believe it or not, it's kind of there can be a bit of a community there as well, because you're meeting like-minded people, so you've got a similar interest anyway. Because sometimes, not necessarily just the saunas, but some of the bars as well, you might just go the dark room bit, and you've got to understand having a pint with somebody, having a beer, and you're just chatting, and actually, you're having a normal conversation with somebody that you just had sex with. You don't know the name, but so yes, it's and then you start seeing some of the same faces again. So you do form, I guess, some kind of sort of friendship, community as well. So that's another thing that I quite enjoy, because being sort of quite a solitary person, it's actually quite nice to sort of bump into faces that you've known from before. And especially some of the events where you've got certain gear, so like leather or rubber or sports kit or whatever, and again, you sort of meet the same, you bump into people that you've met before. So I enjoyed that sort of element of it as much as sex side of it as well. But so that's where prep came in for me, because I wanted to go to those sort of places, and I wanted to have that opportunity to, I was going to say, one less thing to worry about. Do you know what I mean? I didn't have to worry about whether they used a condom or didn't use a condom. That was something we could discuss, and but it took some of the pressure off, and it gave me the chance to just relax and enjoy and listen to my body, and see how other people reacted and were engaging with each other as well. So that's why I find the prep thing was really good for me in that kind of environment, and it has helped me, and I do enjoy it. So,
I've heard from quite a few people what you're saying around kind of feeling that sex on premises spaces are an extension of the community and people connecting with one another, and kind of going to some of those spaces and delivering like testing services and stuff. Each one has its own element of community. So you might have people that I don't know have been working the night shift and come afterwards to relax and chill out with one another, and like you said, have those chats, but also feel a comfort in their own body. I think there's something going back to that sense of intimacy and other people exploring your body, and as a result of them exploring your body, you start to feel more comfortable with that. You start to notice kind of like what's pleasurable and the different ways that your body might look or feel in, say, different positions and stuff, which is maybe something that we don't talk openly about to maybe our friends. No. We sometimes might be quite maybe overly casual about sex and what it means to a lot of people, about that intimacy and connection. And like you've said before about language and the way that we talk about sexual health, again, evolving that, the way that we talk about sex. I'm wondering as well whether people have maybe had that time whilst they have been alone to maybe explore their bodies a bit more as well and get to know their bodies and what's pleasurable before they get back out there, to be able to sort of instruct or navigate partners around their body, I think is a really important thing.
Yeah. I can't, it's really hard to describe the feeling of sort of going to those sort of places, and because we talked about the validation before, and to a degree, you don't get validation by you validate yourself. It's not really external. It's not from other people wanting to be with you or anything like that. That's really how you shouldn't get validation. But by the same token, I think most of us sort of realise that actually a little bit of us wants that as well. A little bit. It's not just about me accepting myself. It's about somebody else sort of saying, "Hey, yeah, for whatever reason, I find you attractive, or I want to spend time with you, or whatever." And yeah, I think we all need a lot of us, I think, probably need a little bit of that as well.
I think particularly as well that probably for quite a lot of us, we didn't really have a sex education, and a lot of that education is either coming from our peers or kind of trying things out. And I think it's been a long time coming to make sure that everyone, excuse the pun, to get to know all of those factors that come into sexual health. So I totally get why people might be really anxious about accessing sexual health services or advice and information, because it probably can be quite overwhelming if it's something that you haven't heard before and it feels like there's so many components to it. And
let's say, because if the language is wrong, if I'm looking at something and it's the wrong language for me, I think that service isn't for me, and I'm not. I wouldn't get what I needed if I went to that service. So, it's that, again, language becomes very important, and for various reasons, people don't want to engage in service because they don't think it's part of them. And that's where you've mentioned the Clinic Clue and the Brighton Clinic T, Birmingham got one. So those sort of places, they very explicitly say we are for trans people or non-binary people, and and so people know that when they go to those places, that their transness, if you like, doesn't sort of get in the way, and it doesn't cause a complication. I mean, when I sort of first started engaging in sexual health service, I was quite open about how, because to me it did make sense in that sort of environment what body parts I'd got, so how I had sex was kind of relevant. The tests that you get done, and the way that the test is administered or whatever. So at that time, I guess maybe that's why I've always been very open about it, because in those sort of environments, I think for me, I felt that it was important to be very open and honest. And so once you start talking about it, then actually it becomes a little bit easier to talk about anyway. But you go to some other places and people kind of make assumptions on your outward appearance, not necessarily about anything else. So they don't necessarily understand how you engage with other people, and kind of the sex that you do have. So the services then become very important, because if you don't feel like you belong there, then you don't go there. So then you don't get your testing done regularly. But obviously, one of the upsides of that is we do have home testing kits now anyway. So I mean, I still think that the welfare side of it, the face-to-face going in every now and again, I think is pretty important. I think it's very important. But I also understand why people might be a little bit wary about going, or may not be able to get in, X amount of times in the year. So at least home testing kit.
Yeah, I think you're totally right about, often there can be a feeling that when you start to talk about your identity, that you can be pathologized, that they start asking you questions that just aren't relevant to the service that you want to get. And it's again, that trying to find that space that you feel comfortable in, that you can have an open conversation about not only kind of the sex that you're having, but the sex that you want to have, and how sometimes, like you said, it is about what sex you're having, what is going where, then makes that decision about what test you should be having. But it is also hard to kind of know from the outset that you're going to be receiving the service that you deserve. I mean, you've already listed some really great specific sexual health services for the trans community, and also to any trans viewers tonight, or allies that of trans people, to say that Positive East services are trans inclusive, and that you will be supported with finding the sex that you want to be having, and make sure that you have all of the tests and support and information, advice that is relevant to your experience. And I think it's just about treating people as individuals, isn't it? Rather than, yes, you can be a member of a community, but you are also a person. And again, it's this notion that not all kind of men who have sex with men are having anal sex. Not all women are having vaginal sex. You've got to have that one-to-one conversation with people to find out, what gives them pleasure.
Yeah. I mean, I talk a lot about honesty, being honest with the type of relationships that you have, being honest with yourself about what you want. And then that translates into other things as well. So be honest with your sexual health advisor, about, don't feel embarrassed to say, oh, actually, I like to do this, or do you know what I mean? Or actually, I don't know how many partners I've had in the last week. I've lost count because I went to an event or something, and it's like, I mean, okay, that element of it, how many partners you have, doesn't really, they used to ask that, but now they don't sort of ask that so much now, because it's not really quite so relevant. It's about whether you've had partners, whether you actually know their HIV status, for example, which is probably more of a relevant question a lot of the times now, rather than, because it doesn't matter if it's one person or 30 people that you saw that night. It's whether you know what their status is and whether you're on PrEP or use condoms or whatever. Those sort of questions are slightly more relevant. So, but it's you've got to be honest with yourself and not be embarrassed as well. I think that's one of the big things for me. Yeah, honesty, honest with yourself, honest about the relationships you have, and therefore you'll get the right advice. Because if you give them the wrong advice, they might think that PrEP isn't something that you necessarily need. But actually, if you're really honest with yourself, you might have given a slightly different answer, and it might have changed their opinion, and you might have got different advice back.
And I think, like you were saying as well, for some people, different types of relationships or sex or intimacy that people want will change over time. I think, again, it kind of relates back to Brace as well, about him being honest with his girlfriend at the time that he didn't want to be with her anymore. And again, like, that world might have been new to him in terms of exploring some of those clubs and spaces. And I guess going back to what you were saying, which is kind of, it's okay to be an observer rather than a participant to begin with. So you scope out what feels safe and comfortable. And I guess that we don't always need to necessarily go into things knowing whether it's the right fit for us or not. Sometimes it takes experimenting to find out what feels good, what's not so great, what might require a little tweak, and some things where you're just kind of like just not interested.
Because we don't know if Adam, in a year's time, because they were still friends, that they actually might have gone, do you know what? We were right together and it was what we wanted. And look, I'm sorry, I needed to find out for myself who I was first. But now I'm pretty solid. Are we still friends, or do we want to go back to what we had before? And who knows? You don't, just because you go, that's the whole point. It's an experimentation. It's finding out what you want, what you like. And
I feel like I need that answer now. I feel like we need to speak to Jake and find out what happened. What happened 5 years later? I need to know now.
Did him and Rocky ever meet or get together? Did he, was he still friends with his girlfriend, or what was his girlfriend at the time? Did they move on? But yeah, it's the whole thing is, life is just one big change. Everything changes. Tomorrow will be different from today, and although some things might not change very much, but over time, eventually it'll change. We're not the same people you were. You're a 2-year-old. It's not the same person as when you're 12. It's not the same person as when you're 21. It's not the same person as when you're 45. You know what I mean? There are elements that are going to be the same all the way through, but in between all those things, you're going to have tried different things, found things that you like, found things that you don't like, gain knowledge, and all of those things shape you, and events around you will shape you as well. What's happened for the last 18 months?
Yeah.
I'm guessing a lot of us are going to be carrying little bits of that around with us for a long time. Some people more than others. And I think that's one of the things that sort of, I think that, sorry.
No,
just change, just embrace it, just kind of go with the flow sometimes, I think.
Yeah, I think it's going back to that thing of kind of people to just pace themselves and see how they're feeling, and I guess go at their own pace, not going to the beat of anyone else's drum, particularly whilst we are just in a pandemic.
Because we can go and hug somebody next week or whenever it is, we can go and do it. Doesn't mean say you have to. If you want to, go ahead. And if you don't want to, and you don't ever hug anybody again, then that's fine as well. But if it takes you a year to feel comfortable doing that, then it takes a year. Just it's all about doing what's right for you. And I get informed choices. You mentioned that before as well. That's something I say a lot. It's informed choice. You do what's right for you. And for the people around you, as long as you're not, as long as minimize, if you end up hurting somebody, if you minimize hurting somebody and minimize hurting yourself, then that's all you can try and do.
To kind of like leave us on a final note, what would your advice be to trans people that maybe haven't accessed sexual health services before, who might be worried about doing it, might have been putting it off? What kind of advice would you give them?
Don't put it off. I mean, have a look. If you're worried about your local environment, because there may be reasons for that. I mean, if you're living in a fairly rural area, then you might want to, you might not be comfortable in those sort of environments. But find somewhere that you feel that you're going to belong to. So it might mean going to one of the places that we mentioned that is very specifically for trans people, but all the other places will have people that are trained and knowledgeable and will be there for trans people as well. Don't let that put you off just because they're not specifically aimed at being for trans people. It doesn't matter. You can still go there. And yeah, just go and get tested. No, especially if you are, if you are going out there and meeting new people, then the various different tests, go and get them done, not just HIV. And yeah, I mean, the places I went to weren't trans specific place. In fact, I've never gone to a trans specific clinic. I've only ever gone to just the normal sexual health clinics, and they've all been really good. So yeah, they know what they're doing. They've seen everybody before, and they've heard everything before. So there's nothing to be sort of frightened of.
And I think just I guess my addition on that is if you need to also talk it through, if it means giving us a call and taking your time with that, you don't have to make that commitment that you are going to come in the following day to have that full sexual health screen. If you're confused about what the tests entail, what questions might be asked, just call up and inquire and kind of process that. You're not necessarily having to then give the responses over the phone. Just think, actually, is this something that I'm comfortable with doing? And just take, like we've been saying all along, just take your time with that.
And you do the test yourself. It's not somebody else doing the test for you.
Yeah.
So you have your privacy in that. So it's not like, somebody else is going to say anything because you go and do the test yourself. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because people were worried about that. Yeah.
Yeah. You're not having to get your bits and bobs out in front of people. Yeah. So we are out of time for today. Thank you so much, Jamie. I do think that people have got will see a good flavour of the work that you've been doing, and thank you for being so open and honest about your own experiences. If anyone has been inspired by Jamie's community activism and fancies being a part of sharing those sexual health messages, please visit the volunteering page on Positive East website. We're always looking for more volunteers to support with our work, and we'd really love to increase the visibility of trans people talking about sexual health. Just a quick reminder that the HIV and STI testing service is returning in person from the 17th of May. So if you go to our website, positiveeast.org.uk, you'll find the HIV and STI testing page, and on there you can book your appointment in. We'll still be delivering our services online as well. So like Jamie was saying, if you want to take a HIV test at home, we give out free HIV self-test kits for people living, working and playing in East London, and we can also coach you through it as well, particularly if it's your first time or you're anxious about reading the results and stuff. We've got a whole host of other services like free condoms, sexual health advice, peer support and counselling if you're living with HIV. And just to let you know that the next Technicolor will take place on Monday the 7th of June at 6 p.m, and we'll be announcing the film and our panellists in the next couple of weeks, so keep an eye out on our social media channels and our website. And lastly, so stop all my rambling, just to say to all our trans viewers, your voices are valid. We want to hear about your experiences and how sexual health services can be improved. Know that your health and well-being matters to us at Positive East, and we unequivocally stand behind the trans community. So thank you very much and good night. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite.